The arrogant CEO threw down the document and sneered. "Translate this ancient contract and my entire company is yours," never imagining that the quiet cleaning woman mopping nearby would change everything. What happened next left a room full of lawyers speechless and transformed two lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Manhattan law offices of Sterling and Associates as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the marble-floored corridor. It was nearly midnight on a Thursday in September, and the prestigious legal firm was finally empty of its high-powered attorneys and their support staff. Maria preferred these quiet hours when she could work in peace, methodically cleaning each office without the weight of judgmental stares or the sting of being treated as invisible. At 42, Maria had been cleaning offices in New York City for over a decade, ever since she arrived from Barcelona with her teenage son Diego and dreams of a better life. The work was steady, honest, and allowed her to support Diego through his studies at Columbia University, where he was pursuing a degree in international business. Every night, she would return to their small Queens apartment, exhausted but satisfied, knowing that each paycheck brought them closer to the American dream she had promised him. The Sterling and Associates building was one of her more challenging assignments. The law firm occupied 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown, and their clients included some of the wealthiest corporations and individuals in the country. The lawyers were demanding, leaving behind coffee-stained desks, overflowing trash cans, and conference rooms that looked like battlefields after particularly intense negotiations. But the pay was good, and Maria took pride in leaving each space spotless. As she approached the large conference room on the 42nd floor, she noticed that the lights were still on. Through the glass walls, she could see several people seated around the massive mahogany table, their faces tense with concentration. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thornton, the CEO of Thornton Industries, a manufacturing empire worth over $3 billion. Even from a distance, Maria could recognize his distinctive silver hair and the expensive suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. Marcus Thornton was notorious in business circles for his ruthless tactics and explosive temper. At 55, he had built his company through aggressive acquisitions and hostile takeovers, earning him both respect and fear in equal measure. His reputation for humiliating competitors and employees alike was legendary, and Maria had overheard enough conversations between the lawyers to know that dealing with Thornton was considered one of the most challenging aspects of working at Sterling and Associates. Maria hesitated outside the conference room, uncertain whether to continue with her cleaning routine or return later. The meeting appeared to be heated, with voices rising and falling in animated discussion. She decided to clean the adjacent offices first, hoping the meeting would conclude soon so she could finish her work and head home to Diego, who would be waiting with updates about his latest job interviews. 20 minutes later, as she organized supplies in a nearby storage closet, Maria heard a door slam with tremendous force. The sound echoed through the corridor, followed by the unmistakable voice of Marcus Thornton raised in anger. Curious despite herself, Maria peered around the corner to see several men in expensive suits standing outside the conference room, their expressions ranging from frustrated to defeated. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Thornton was saying, his voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "I'm paying your firm 7 figures annually, and you're telling me that nobody can translate a simple document? What exactly am I paying for?" James Sterling, the senior partner whose name graced the firm's letterhead, looked uncomfortable as he attempted to calm his volatile client. "Marcus, I understand your frustration, but this isn't just any document. It's written in medieval Latin with legal terminology that predates modern legal systems. We've contacted every expert in the city, but they all say the same thing. It would take weeks of research to provide an accurate translation, and even then, there would be questions about interpretation." Maria's curiosity was piqued. Having grown up in Barcelona, she had studied Latin extensively during her years at university, where she had earned a degree in classical literature before economic circumstances forced her to abandon her academic career. Latin had been her specialty, particularly the medieval legal Latin used in historical documents and ancient contracts. It was knowledge she rarely had occasion to use in her current life, but it remained sharp in her mind through years of personal study and research. Thornton's face was red with anger as he gestured wildly at the papers scattered across the conference table. I don't have weeks. The Castellano family is expecting a response by Monday morning. This acquisition has been 2 years in the making, and now you're telling me it might fall apart because nobody in this entire city can read a piece of paper? Maria knew about the Castellano acquisition from overheard conversations. Thornton Industries was attempting to purchase a historic property development company based in Spain, along with their extensive portfolio of real estate holdings throughout Europe. The deal was reportedly worth over $400 million and would significantly expand Thornton's international presence. However, the Castellano family had insisted that all negotiations be conducted according to the terms of an ancient family charter written in medieval Latin that governed the sale of their assets. "Perhaps we could contact the universities," suggested Patricia Williams, one of the firm's junior partners. "Columbia or NYU might have professors who specialize in medieval languages." "I already tried that," replied another lawyer, consulting his tablet. "Professor Martinez at Columbia is in Italy on sabbatical, and the other experts are either unavailable or say they need extensive time to research the specific legal terminology used in the document." Thornton slammed his fist on the table with such force that several coffee cups jumped. "This is ridiculous. How hard can it be to translate one document? I've built a $3 billion company from nothing, and now I'm being held hostage by a piece of paper written by people who died centuries ago." James Sterling attempted once more to reason with his client. "Marcus, I understand this is frustrating, but rushing the translation could be catastrophic. If we misinterpret even one clause, it could void the entire acquisition or expose you to legal liabilities worth hundreds of millions of dollars." "Fine," Thornton said, his voice dripping with sarcasm and contempt. "If this document is so impossible to translate, then here's what I'll do." He picked up the ancient parchment from the table and held it aloft. "I'll make it simple for everyone. Anyone who can accurately translate this document and explain its legal implications will receive my entire company. That's right, Thornton Industries, worth $3 billion free and clear." The room fell silent. The lawyers exchanged glances, uncertain whether Thornton was serious or simply venting his frustration. Maria, still hidden in the corridor, felt her heart racing as she stared at the document in Thornton's hand. Even from a distance, she could make out the distinctive script and formal structure of medieval Latin legal writing. "You can't be serious," James Sterling said carefully. "I'm completely serious," Thornton replied, his voice now cold and calculating. "I'll put it in writing if necessary. Anyone who can provide an accurate, complete translation of this document, along with a legal analysis of its implications for the acquisition, will become the sole owner of Thornton." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Industries. If your fancy lawyers can't do it, maybe I should find someone who can. Patricia Williams cleared her throat nervously. "Marcus, that's a very generous offer, but as your legal counsel, I have to advise against making such a significant commitment based on emotional frustration." "My decision is final," Thornton declared. "I'll give everyone in this room 24 hours. If none of you can meet the challenge, then I'll take my business elsewhere and find lawyers who can actually practice law instead of making excuses." As the lawyers continued their attempts to dissuade Thornton from his impulsive challenge, Maria found herself studying the document more carefully. The parchment appeared to be genuinely ancient, with the distinctive characteristics of medieval legal writing that she had spent years studying during her university days in Barcelona. The formal structure, the specific terminology, and even the calligraphy style were familiar to her from countless hours spent translating historical documents for her thesis on medieval Spanish legal systems. Maria's mind raced as she considered the implications of what she was witnessing. This was clearly a moment of high drama in a business deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and the entire transaction was being held up by a translation challenge that she was uniquely qualified to meet. The irony was almost overwhelming. Here was Marcus Thornton, one of the most powerful men in American business, offering his entire empire to anyone who could accomplish a task that Maria could likely complete in a few hours. But even as the possibility excited her, Maria was acutely aware of the vast gulf between her current position and the world these people inhabited. She was a cleaning woman, an immigrant working multiple jobs to support her son's education. These were lawyers and business executives who moved in circles of power and privilege that she could barely imagine. The idea of speaking up, of inserting herself into their high-stakes negotiation, seemed both audacious and terrifying. The meeting continued for another 10 minutes, with various lawyers attempting to convince Thornton to reconsider his challenge. Finally, the CEO gathered his materials and stood up to leave, his face still flushed with anger and frustration. 24 hours, he repeated as he headed toward the door. If none of you can meet this simple challenge, then maybe it's time for me to find legal representation that can actually solve problems instead of creating them. As Thornton and his entourage filed out of the conference room, Maria retreated further into the shadows of the corridor, her mind spinning with possibilities and doubts. She waited until the elevator doors closed behind them before emerging from her hiding place and approaching the conference room, where the ancient document still lay on the mahogany table, abandoned in the chaos of Thornton's dramatic exit. The lawyers remaining in the room were engaged in heated discussion about the impossible situation their client had created. James Sterling was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his gray hair in obvious distress. "This is a disaster," he was saying to Patricia Williams and two other associates. "Thornton is serious about this challenge, and if we can't deliver, he'll take his business to Morrison and Associates. That's a seven-figure account, not to mention the referrals and prestige that come with representing Thornton Industries. But how can we possibly meet his demands?" Patricia replied, gesturing helplessly at the document. "We've contacted every expert in the city. Professor Martinez won't be back from Italy for 3 weeks, and even then, he warned us that medieval legal Latin is notoriously difficult to interpret accurately." Maria stood in the doorway, invisible to the lawyers who were too absorbed in their crisis to notice her presence. She clutched her cleaning supplies tightly, fighting an internal battle between caution and opportunity. Everything she had learned about surviving in America as an immigrant worker told her to remain silent, to continue cleaning and stay in her assigned role. But everything she had learned about seizing opportunities, about fighting for a better life for herself and Diego, urged her to speak up. Finally, she cleared her throat softly and stepped into the conference room. "Excuse me," she said in her accented but fluent English. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing your discussion." The lawyers turned toward her with expressions of surprise and mild irritation. James Sterling glanced at his watch and frowned. "I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of an important meeting. Could you please come back later to clean this room?" "I understand," Maria replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I believe I might be able to help with your translation problem." Patricia Williams looked at her with barely concealed incredulity. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "The document on the table," Maria continued, pointing toward the ancient parchment. "It's written in medieval Latin, specifically the legal Latin used in Spanish property law during the 13th and 14th centuries. I studied this type of writing extensively during my university years in Barcelona." The room fell completely silent. The lawyers stared at Maria as if she had just claimed to be able to fly. James Sterling was the first to recover his composure, though his tone remained skeptical. "You studied medieval legal Latin?" he asked slowly. "Yes," Maria replied, taking a step closer to the table. "I earned my degree in classical literature from the Universidad de Barcelona, with a specialization in medieval legal documents. My thesis focused on the evolution of property law in medieval Spain, and I spent 3 years translating documents very similar to this one." Patricia Williams exchanged a glance with her colleagues before addressing Maria again. "That's very interesting. But this is an extremely important business transaction worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to be absolutely certain about any translation we provide to our client." "I understand completely," Maria said, her confidence growing as she discussed her area of expertise. "If you would allow me to examine the document more closely, I could provide you with a preliminary assessment of its contents and complexity. Then you could make an informed decision about whether my qualifications are sufficient for your needs." James Sterling considered this for a moment, clearly torn between desperation and professional caution. Finally, he gestured toward the table. "Very well, please, take a look. But I want to be clear that we're not making any commitments based on this conversation." Maria approached the table and carefully lifted the ancient parchment, handling it with the reverence and expertise of someone who had spent years working with historical documents. As she began to examine the text, her excitement grew. The document was indeed written in the formal, legal Latin she knew so well, and the subject matter was immediately recognizable to her trained eye. This is a family charter establishing the conditions under which the Castellano family's assets may be transferred to outside parties, she said after several minutes of careful study. It was written in 1387, during the reign of King Juan I of Aragon, and it incorporates both Roman legal principles and local Spanish customary law. The lawyers watched in amazement as Maria continued her analysis, pointing to specific passages and explaining their significance with the fluency of an expert. For the first time since Thornton's ultimatum, James Sterling began to feel a glimmer of hope. The key provision, Maria continued, requires that any purchaser of Castellano assets must demonstrate three things: financial capability, which is straightforward; cultural respect, meaning they must commit to preserving the historical significance of certain properties; and family consent, which requires approval from at least 2/3 of the surviving Castellano descendants. Patricia Williams leaned forward, her skepticism giving way to genuine interest. And you're confident about these interpretations? The language is quite clear once you understand the medieval legal conventions, Maria replied. There are a few archaic terms that might confuse a modern translator, but the overall structure and intent are unmistakable. This charter was designed to ensure that the family's legacy would be protected, even if economic circumstances forced them to sell their holdings. James Sterling felt his pulse quickening as he realized the implications of what Maria was telling them. How long would it take you to provide a complete, written translation with legal analysis? Maria considered the question carefully, mentally calculating the time needed to produce a thorough and professional document. If I could work on it tonight and tomorrow, I could have a complete translation and analysis ready by tomorrow evening. But I would need access to some reference materials to verify certain technical terms and ensure absolute accuracy. We have an extensive legal library, Patricia offered eagerly, and access to historical databases through the university systems. The room buzzing with sudden energy as the lawyers realized they might have found a solution to their impossible problem. James Sterling was already calculating how to present this development to Marcus Thornton, while Patricia Williams was thinking about the logistics of supporting Maria's work. But Maria herself was focused on something else entirely. As she looked around the opulent conference room, at the lawyers in their expensive suits discussing a business deal worth more money than she could imagine, she realized that she was standing at a crossroads that could change her life forever. If she could successfully complete this translation, if she could meet Marcus Thornton's challenge, she wouldn't just be helping these lawyers save their client relationship. She would be positioning herself to claim the most audacious prize in business history: ownership of a $3 billion company. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Maria had spent years dreaming of a better life for herself and Diego, but those dreams had always been modest: a better apartment, steady work, perhaps eventually opening a small business of her own. The possibility of suddenly becoming one of the wealthiest people in America was so far beyond her imagination that she could barely process it. But as she looked down at the ancient document in her hands, Maria felt a surge of confidence that surprised her. This was her area of expertise, her moment to use the knowledge and skills that had been lying dormant for so many years. She had spent over a decade cleaning offices and taking whatever work she could find to support her son's education, all while carrying inside her the education and capabilities that could solve problems for some of the most powerful people in the country. "There's something else you should know," Maria said quietly to the assembled lawyers. Mr. Thornton made his challenge very clear. He offered his company to anyone who could translate this document and provide legal analysis. If I complete this work successfully, according to his own words, I would have a legal claim to Thornton Industries. The room fell silent again, as the implications of Maria's statement sank in. James Sterling's expression shifted from relief to concern as he realized the potential complications of the situation they were creating. "Now hold on," he said carefully. "I'm not sure Marcus was entirely serious about that offer. He was frustrated and speaking emotionally. I don't think he intended to create a legally binding commitment." "But he made the offer in front of multiple witnesses," Maria replied calmly. "And from what I overheard, he specifically said he would put it in writing if necessary. If I meet his challenge, I intend to hold him to his word." Patricia Williams looked stunned. "You're talking about claiming ownership of a $3 billion company. Do you understand the complexity of what you're suggesting?" "I understand that Mr. Thornton made a public challenge and offered a specific reward," Maria answered. I also understand that my circumstances don't change the validity of his offer or my ability to meet his requirements. The question is whether you're willing to help me access the resources I need to complete the translation, or whether you'd prefer to tell your client that you found someone who could solve his problem but decided not to pursue it. The lawyers exchanged glances, each calculating the risks and benefits of the extraordinary situation unfolding before them. James Sterling was thinking about the potential legal complications of supporting Maria's claim against their own client, while Patricia Williams was wondering whether they had a professional obligation to help her access the translation resources regardless of the consequences. Finally, James Sterling made his decision. "Very well," he said slowly. "We'll provide you with access to our legal library and research databases. You can work here tonight and tomorrow to complete your translation. But I want to be clear that we're not taking any position on the validity of Marcus Thornton's offer or your potential claim to his company." "That's all I'm asking for," Maria replied. "Just the opportunity to meet his challenge on equal terms." As the lawyers began discussing the practical arrangements for Maria's work, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation that she had never experienced before. In the space of a single evening, her life had taken a turn that seemed more like something from a movie than reality. Tomorrow, she would either return to her quiet life as a cleaning woman, or she would begin the most audacious legal battle in modern business history. But tonight she had work to do. Maria Santos, the immigrant cleaning woman who had spent years invisible in the corridors of power, was about to step into the spotlight and challenge one of the most powerful men in America, with nothing more than her knowledge, her determination, and an ancient piece of parchment that held the key to everything. The next 18 hours would prove to be the most transformative of Maria Santos's life. As the lawyers filed out of the conference room, leaving her alone with the ancient document and access to Sterling & Associates' extensive legal library, Maria felt the weight of the moment settling upon her shoulders. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she carefully photographed each page of the Castellano Charter with her phone, then began the meticulous process of transcription and translation. Working through the night, Maria found herself completely absorbed in the intricate language of medieval Spanish law. Each clause required careful consideration, not just of the literal translation but of the legal implications within the context of 14th-century property rights. She cross-referenced historical databases, consulted legal precedents, and methodically built a comprehensive analysis that would satisfy even the most demanding modern attorney. By dawn, Maria had completed the initial translation. The document revealed fascinating details about the Castellano family's foresight in protecting their legacy. The charter required potential buyers to establish a cultural preservation fund, maintain certain properties as historical sites, and provide ongoing support for local communities that had been connected to Castellano holdings for centuries. More importantly, it contained specific clauses about how ownership transfers must be conducted, including requirements for public declaration and witness verification. As she refined her analysis throughout Friday morning, Maria couldn't help but think about the parallels between her own situation and the medieval families who had crafted this document. They too had been concerned about protecting their legacy against powerful outsiders who might not understand or respect their values. The irony that she, an immigrant cleaning woman, might be the one to unlock these protections for a modern Spanish family was not lost on her. James Sterling arrived at the office early Friday morning to find Maria still working at the conference table, surrounded by reference books and legal documents. Her translation was nearly complete, typed on the firm's letterhead with professional formatting and detailed footnotes explaining the historical context of each provision. "How is the work progressing?" he asked, setting down a cup of coffee near her workspace. "I should have the final version ready by this afternoon," Maria replied, looking up from her laptop with tired but determined eyes. "The document is more complex than I initially expected, but the legal framework is quite clear once you understand the medieval conventions." Sterling reviewed her preliminary draft, his eyebrows rising as he absorbed the quality and depth of her analysis. This was not the work of an amateur or someone simply guessing at meanings. Maria's translation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both linguistic nuances and legal implications that would satisfy the most demanding academic review. "This is remarkable work," he admitted. "I have to ask, Maria, what happened to your academic career? With qualifications like this, surely you could have found positions in universities or research institutions." Maria's expression grew distant, as she considered how to explain the difficult choices that had brought her to this moment. When I arrived in America 12 years ago, Diego was only 14 and struggling with the language. I needed steady income immediately, not the uncertain path of academic validation and credential recognition. Cleaning work was available, honest, and allowed me to support him while he adjusted to life here. But surely as he got older you could have pursued other opportunities. Perhaps, Maria acknowledged. But by then, we had established a life, a routine. Diego was excelling in school, and I was afraid to risk the stability we had built by chasing dreams that might not materialize. Sometimes survival requires putting aside what you want in favor of what your family needs. Sterling nodded thoughtfully, beginning to understand the quiet strength and sacrifice that had shaped Maria's journey. As he watched her return to her work, he realized that Marcus Thornton was about to encounter someone whose determination had been forged through years of overcoming obstacles that the wealthy CEO had never faced. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus Thornton was having a very different kind of morning. His assistant had spent the early hours fielding calls from various language experts and translation services, all of whom had confirmed what Sterling and Associates had already told him. The Castellano Charter was an extremely specialized document that would require weeks of careful research to translate accurately. Thornton's frustration had only intensified overnight. The acquisition timeline was critical, and delays could cost him not just the Spanish properties, but also several related deals that depended on the Castellano purchase. He had built his empire through decisive action and aggressive tactics, and the idea of being stymied by an ancient piece of paper was infuriating. "Get James Sterling on the phone," he barked to his assistant. "I want an update on their progress, and if they don't have solutions, I want recommendations for firms that do." When Sterling's call came through 20 minutes later, Thornton was pacing in his corner office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline while contemplating the potential collapse of 2 years of careful negotiations. "Marcus," Sterling began carefully, "I have some unexpected news about your translation challenge." "Please tell me someone has found a way to read that medieval gibberish," Thornton replied impatiently. "Actually, yes, we've found someone with the exact qualifications needed to provide an accurate translation and legal analysis. The work is nearly complete, and I believe you'll be impressed with the quality and thoroughness of the analysis." Thornton felt a surge of relief mixed with curiosity. "Excellent. Which university did you contact? Columbia? NYU? I want to meet with this expert personally to discuss the implications." Sterling hesitated, knowing that the next part of the conversation would be delicate. "Actually, Marcus, the translator isn't affiliated with any university. She's someone we encountered here at the firm who happens to have specialized expertise in medieval Spanish legal documents." "She?" Thornton's interest was piqued. "What's her background? Corporate consulting? Government work?" "It's rather complicated," Sterling replied, choosing his words carefully. "Her name is Maria Santos, and she has a degree in classical literature from the Universidad de Barcelona, with specialization in medieval legal language. She's been working on your document through the night and should have the complete analysis ready this afternoon." Something in Sterling's tone made Thornton suspicious. "James, you're being evasive. Who exactly is this woman, and why haven't I heard of her before if she's such an expert?" Sterling took a deep breath, knowing there was no way to avoid the truth. "Maria Santos works in the building as part of the cleaning staff. She overheard our discussion last night and offered to help with the translation." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Sterling wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, Thornton's voice came through, quiet and dangerous. "Are you telling me that you've entrusted a $400 million acquisition to a cleaning woman? Marcus, I understand your concerns, but her qualifications are legitimate. She has the exact academic background needed for this type of work, and her preliminary analysis demonstrates sophisticated understanding of both the language and legal implications." "A cleaning woman," Thornton repeated, his voice rising. "James, have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what kind of liability exposure this creates? What happens when the Castellano family discovers that their precious family charter was translated by someone who mops floors for a living?" Sterling had anticipated this reaction, but he also knew that Maria's work spoke for itself. "Why don't you review her analysis before making any judgments? I think you'll find that her expertise is undeniable, regardless of her current employment." "Oh, I'll definitely be reviewing her work, Thornton said coldly. And I'll be there this afternoon to meet this cleaning woman who thinks she can play in the big leagues. This better be perfect, James, because if it's not, I'll be looking for new legal representation. As Thornton hung up the phone, his mind was already racing with implications and concerns. The idea that his massive acquisition might depend on the work of a janitor was both absurd and infuriating. But beneath his anger was something else, a nagging memory of his own challenge from the night before. He had made a very public offer to give his company to anyone who could translate the document, and now someone was apparently going to meet that challenge. Back at Sterling & Associates, Maria was putting the finishing touches on her translation and analysis. The document she had produced was comprehensive, professional, and demonstrated mastery of both medieval Latin and modern legal principles. She had identified several critical clauses that would significantly impact the acquisition structure, including requirements for cultural preservation funding and community development commitments that would add millions to the purchase price, but were essential for completing the transaction legally. As she printed the final version, Maria reflected on the surreal nature of her situation. 24 hours ago, she had been invisible, just another service worker moving through the corridors of power without being seen or acknowledged. Now she was potentially about to claim ownership of one of America's largest private companies based on knowledge she had gained decades ago in a Barcelona classroom. The legal implications were staggering. If Thornton honored his challenge, she would instantly become one of the wealthiest people in the country. But even if he tried to back out, she had witnesses to his public offer and the legal expertise to pursue the matter in court. Either way, her life was about to change dramatically. Patricia Williams arrived at the office around noon to find Maria completing her final review of the translation. "How are you feeling about the work?" she asked, settling into a chair across from Maria at the conference table. "Confident," Maria replied simply. "The translation is accurate, and the legal analysis addresses all the implications that Mr. Thornton needs to understand for his acquisition. The Castellano Charter is actually quite favorable to buyers who are willing to respect the family's cultural requirements." Patricia reviewed the document, impressed despite herself by the thoroughness and professionalism of Maria's work. "Marcus Thornton is coming here this afternoon to review your analysis personally. I should warn you that he's not entirely pleased about the circumstances." Maria smiled slightly, a hint of steel in her expression. "I imagine he's not. Powerful men rarely enjoy being challenged by people they consider beneath them. But his personal feelings don't change the quality of my work or the validity of his offer." "You're really planning to hold him to the challenge?" Patricia asked. "You understand that claiming ownership of Thornton Industries would involve legal battles that could last for years?" "I understand that Mr. Thornton made a public commitment in front of multiple witnesses," Maria replied. "I also understand that I've met the requirements of his challenge. Whether he honors his word or forces me to pursue legal action is his choice." As the afternoon progressed, tension built throughout the Sterling & Associates offices. Word had spread quickly about the extraordinary situation developing on the 42nd floor, and lawyers throughout the firm were finding excuses to walk past the conference room where Maria continued to work. The idea that a cleaning woman might be about to claim ownership of a billion-dollar company was the kind of story that would become legend in legal circles. Marcus Thornton arrived at precisely 3 p.m., accompanied by 2 associates and radiating the kind of controlled fury that his business rivals had learned to fear. He strode into the conference room without acknowledging Maria's presence, settling into the chair at the head of the table as if establishing his dominance over the space. "I assume this is the famous cleaning lady translator," he said, his tone dripping with condescension as he finally looked directly at Maria. "I have to admit, this is a first for me. I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never had a janitor try to insert herself into a major acquisition." Maria met his gaze steadily, unintimidated by his aggressive posture. "My name is Maria Santos, Mr. Thornton, and I believe you'll find that my professional qualifications are more relevant to this situation than my current employment." Thornton picked up her translation and analysis, scanning the pages with obvious skepticism. "Let's see what kind of expertise money can buy these days," he muttered, beginning to read through her work in detail. As minutes passed, Thornton's expression gradually shifted from dismissive to surprised to genuinely impressed. Maria's translation was not only accurate, but revealed nuances and implications that even expert legal minds might have missed. Her analysis of the cultural preservation requirements was particularly insightful, identifying potential compliance strategies that could actually strengthen the acquisition rather than complicate it. "The section about community development commitments," Thornton said finally, looking up from the document. "You've calculated the financial impact at approximately $12 million over 5 years. How did you arrive at that figure?" "Based on similar requirements in other medieval Spanish charters I've studied," Maria replied confidently. "The language specifies support proportional to the acquisition value, and historical precedent suggests that courts interpret this as roughly 3% of the purchase price distributed over the first 5 years of ownership." Thornton made notes on his copy, asking increasingly detailed questions about specific clauses and their modern legal implications. Despite his obvious reluctance to acknowledge it, Maria's expertise was undeniable. She answered each question with precision and depth that demonstrated not just linguistic skill but sophisticated understanding of how medieval legal principles translated into contemporary business practice. After 45 minutes of intensive questioning, Thornton sat back in his chair, staring at Maria with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. "This is excellent work," he admitted reluctantly. "Thorough, accurate, and professionally presented. You've identified issues that could have created serious problems if we'd proceeded without understanding them." "Thank you," Maria replied simply. "However," Thornton continued, his tone hardening, "I hope you don't seriously expect me to honor some ridiculous challenge I made in a moment of frustration. That was emotional venting, not a legally binding commitment." Maria had been expecting this response. "Mr. Thornton, you made your offer in front of at least 6 witnesses, including several attorneys. You specifically stated that anyone who could translate the document and provide legal analysis would receive your entire company. You even offered to put the commitment in writing." "I was obviously not serious," Thornton replied dismissively. "No reasonable person would interpret those comments as a genuine business proposition." "Then why did you make the offer?" Maria asked calmly. "Were you lying to motivate your legal team, or did you simply not expect anyone to be capable of meeting your challenge?" Thornton's face reddened at the directness of her question. "I don't appreciate your tone, Ms. Santos. You seem to forget that you work for a cleaning service, not a law firm." "Actually," Maria replied, standing up from her chair, "according to your own challenge, I now work for myself as the owner of Thornton Industries. Unless, of course, you're suggesting that your word means nothing." The room fell silent as the implications of Maria's statement hung in the air. James Sterling and Patricia Williams exchanged nervous glances, realizing that they were witnessing either the beginning of the most audacious corporate takeover in history, or the setup for a legal battle that would make headlines around the world. Thornton stood up as well, his imposing height and expensive suit a stark contrast to Maria's simple work clothes. "You're making a serious mistake if you think you can extort me with some ridiculous interpretation of an offhand comment." "I'm not extorting anyone," Maria replied evenly. "I'm simply holding you accountable for your public commitment. You offered your company to anyone who could meet your challenge, and I've done exactly that. The question now is whether you're a man of your word or just another wealthy executive who thinks his promises don't apply when dealing with people he considers inferior." The confrontation escalated as Thornton realized that Maria was not going to be intimidated or dismissed. This was not some desperate cleaning woman looking for attention. This was someone who understood exactly what she was claiming and had the knowledge and determination to pursue it. "Even if I had made such an offer, which I dispute," Thornton said through gritted teeth, "you would have no idea how to run a company like Thornton Industries. You'd destroy everything I've built within months." "Perhaps," Maria acknowledged, "but that's not your decision to make anymore. If you honor your commitment, the company becomes mine to manage as I see fit. If you don't honor your commitment, then everyone in this room will know that Marcus Thornton's word is worthless." The standoff continued for several more minutes, with neither side willing to back down. Finally, Thornton gathered his materials and headed toward the door. "This conversation is over. Miss Santos, I suggest you return to your cleaning duties and forget about this absurd fantasy. James, I'll expect a call from you tomorrow morning with a more reasonable approach to the Castellanos situation." As Thornton left the conference room, Maria remained standing at the table, her expression calm but determined. She had expected his refusal, but she had also come prepared for this moment. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out a folder containing documents she had prepared during her lunch break. "Mr. Sterling," she said, turning to the senior partner who was still processing what he had just witnessed, "I'll need you to file these papers with the court first thing Monday morning." Sterling opened the folder to find a comprehensive legal brief outlining Maria's claim to Thornton Industries based on his public challenge. The document was professionally prepared, citing relevant case law about verbal contracts, public commitments, and witness testimony. It was clear that Maria had used her time at the law firm not just to translate the Castellano Charter, but to research the legal framework for enforcing Thornton's challenge. "Maria," Patricia Williams said carefully, "pursuing this claim will require significant legal resources. Corporate litigation against someone like Marcus Thornton could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." "I understand," Maria replied, "but I also understand that contingency fee arrangements exist for cases with strong merit. I'm confident that there are attorneys who would be interested in taking on Marcus Thornton, especially when the case involves his own public statements and the potential recovery is a $3 billion company." As the reality of Maria's determination sank in, the lawyers began to realize that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This was not just a dispute over a translation or a misunderstood comment. This was a direct challenge to the assumptions and privileges that defined corporate America, delivered by someone who had been invisible in their world until she chose to step into the light. Over the weekend, word of the confrontation spread through New York's business and legal communities like wildfire. The story of the cleaning woman who claimed ownership of Thornton Industries, based on a translation challenge, captured public imagination in ways that surprised everyone involved. Social media exploded with commentary about corporate arrogance, immigrant determination, and the power of education to level playing fields. Maria spent Saturday morning meeting with 3 different law firms, each eager to take on such a high-profile case. By Sunday evening, she had retained Morrison & Associates, ironically the same firm that Thornton had threatened to hire if Sterling couldn't solve his translation problem. The attorneys were confident that Maria's claim had strong legal merit, particularly given the number of witnesses to Thornton's challenge and the clear terms he had established. Monday morning brought a flurry of activity as Morrison and Associates filed Maria's claim in New York State Court, simultaneously releasing a statement to the media outlining her position. The story exploded across business news networks, with legal experts debating the merits of verbal contracts and the implications of corporate challenges made in front of witnesses. Thornton Industries' stock price fluctuated wildly as investors tried to assess the potential impact of the lawsuit. Legal analysts were divided about Maria's chances, but most agreed that Thornton's public challenge created a legitimate basis for litigation, especially given the professional quality of her translation work. Marcus Thornton, meanwhile, was discovering that his attempts to dismiss Maria as a delusional cleaning woman were backfiring spectacularly. Media coverage consistently highlighted her impressive academic credentials and the quality of her translation work, painting him as an arrogant executive who refused to honor his commitments when challenged by someone he considered beneath him. The Castellano family, watching the drama unfold from Spain, issued a statement expressing their confidence in Maria's translation and their willingness to work with whoever ultimately controlled the acquisition. They noted that the entire situation demonstrated exactly why their medieval ancestors had been wise to create legal protections against powerful buyers who might not respect their values and commitments. As the legal battle intensified over the following weeks, Maria found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought but handled with remarkable composure. Television interviews, newspaper profiles, and speaking requests poured in from around the world. The story resonated particularly strongly with immigrant communities and working-class families who saw Maria as proof that knowledge and determination could overcome economic and social barriers. Diego, now in his final semester at Columbia, watched his mother's transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. The woman who had quietly sacrificed her own academic career to support his education was now fighting one of the most powerful men in America for control of a corporate empire. The irony that her willingness to help him study had ultimately provided her with the knowledge to challenge Marcus Thornton was not lost on either of them. 3 months after that fateful evening in the Sterling & Associates conference room, Maria Santos stood before a packed courtroom as Judge Sarah Henderson prepared to rule on the most unusual corporate ownership dispute in modern legal history. The case had attracted international attention, with media representatives from dozens of countries present to witness the outcome. The legal arguments had been compelling on both sides. Thornton's attorneys argued that his challenge was clearly hyperbolic and that no reasonable person would interpret his frustrated comments as a genuine business offer. They emphasized the absurdity of transferring a billion-dollar company based on a translation task, regardless of how well it was executed. Maria's legal team countered that Thornton's offer had been specific, public, and made in front of multiple witnesses who could testify to his exact words. They presented evidence that he had offered to put the commitment in writing and had established clear criteria for claiming the reward. Most importantly, they demonstrated that Maria had met every requirement of his challenge with professional competence that exceeded industry standards. Judge Henderson had spent weeks reviewing precedent cases involving verbal contracts, public challenges, and corporate ownership disputes. The unique circumstances of Maria's claim required careful consideration of how traditional contract law applied to extraordinary situations where the stakes vastly exceeded normal expectations. As the judge prepared to deliver her ruling, Maria sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, wearing a navy blue suit that Diego had helped her select for the occasion. She had come impossibly far from the cleaning woman who had overheard a frustrated CEO's challenge 18 months earlier, but her fundamental character remained unchanged. She was still the determined immigrant mother who had spent years sacrificing for her family's future, now fighting for recognition and respect in the highest levels of American business. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Henderson began to speak, her words carrying the weight of a decision that would either validate Maria's extraordinary claim or confirm that some barriers in American society remained insurmountable, regardless of knowledge, determination, or merit. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.